Yes, this is DJ Ski.
I'm Jeff Wilson.
Hey guys, Andy Broom, Vice President CGC Cards.
Hey, this is Jason Howard with Panini.
Yo, I'm Q Harrison.
This is Teapot from Sports Card Investor.
I'm loving the content.
Loving the content here.
The Sports Card Strategy Show.
The Sports Card Strategy Show.
This is the Sports Card Strategy Show with your man, Paul Hickey. What's good?
Part of the NoOffSeason.com Sports Card Network, the #1 place for advice on how to make money flipping sports cards. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, there is no off-season.
You already know, there is no off-season.
No off-season!
All right, you ready to rock?
Ready to go.
When you get into this game, the reason why you pay someone like Paul Hickey to get your sports card strategy together is because sometimes when you're starting out, you need perspective, you need wisdom, you need insights. And so he's been around the track enough times where he can actually coach you up and guide you. Doesn't mean he's going to take you to the promised land tomorrow, but you now have a coach by your side that can advise and kind of even create these pathways where you can get the education yourself. And that's a lot better than thugging it out on your own. Thugging it out on your own.
What? The kids better buy my rookie card now, because after this year, the price ain't coming down.
Welcome in, everybody. I'm your host, Paul Hickey. It's time to sit back, listen, learn, and earn with me on the Sports Card Strategy Show. What's going on, hobbyists? Paul Hickey here with NoOffSeason.com and the Sports Card Strategy Show. Here with my man, Clark Kim, 5 Card Guys, Cards to the Moon. What's up, Clark?
Yeah, not much. Just enjoying the hobby as usual.
Welcome in, everybody, Cards to the Moon listeners and Sports Card Strategy Show listeners. It's time for our special extra episode of the month here between Clark and I. We like to talk about a variety of topics, and today I think we've got some interesting ones for you guys. We're going to get going with something that I hope sparks some real conversation throughout the hobby in terms of content creators talking about this. So, Clark, let me give the listeners some background here. We have a podcast every week for our premium members at NoOffSeason.com. We call it the Premium Pod. The premise of it is that we like to help people with their sports card strategy. You can ask us an unlimited amount of questions throughout the year, and we answer them as soon as we get them on the Premium Podcast. So you ask a question later that week, it gets answered on the Premium Podcast. I love that one of our Premium members asks this exact question, and I want to talk to you about it. We answered it in last week's Premium Pod, but I want to have a discussion with you about it. Yeah. Here goes. Our Premium member said, I've been kicking around an idea about eBay auctions. What if someone incrementally bid just enough to get a card up to around 75% of the 30-day average, then stepped back and let organic bidders take over? Curious to what you think of this strategy. Do you see ethical concerns, or does it seem like fair game to leverage the eBay algorithm this way? Now, make no mistake about it. We're talking about bidding on our own cards here. Right. And there's a lot to think about, and there's a lot to talk about. Clark, yes. I'm just going to hand it over to you for your initial take on this.
All right. Yeah, no, when you first proposed this, I'm like, okay, that's an interesting topic. And I'm really curious to see what your premium members came up with and what they discussed. But on the face of it, like you're just saying, like you're alluding to, bidding on your own cards, I don't know how you define shill bidding, but I guess it would fall close to that category. And, if you've been in the hobby long enough, it's a dirty word. And obviously for good reason, right? You don't want to inflate the prices of your own cards. But I think this is a little bit more nuanced. So I appreciate the question about, bidding up to 75% of the 30-day average in hopes of leveraging the algorithm. But there's for me at least, there's additional questions to ask based on that premise. So for one of the things that I immediately thought of is we don't really know how the eBay algorithm works. All these platforms keep their algorithm methods and their calculations a secret. And we think we might know based on trends and how things seem to play out in terms of the past auctions, but we don't know for sure. So, by assuming that we can bid to a certain amount and then it'll somehow get, the algorithm will kick in at a certain point, that's just all guesswork. really, right? And I think also the other point in the details of this question is that the 75% of the 30-day average, that could be, that sounds good as a general rule, perhaps, but how about in the case where a player gets injured and that 75% of the 30-day average isn't a accurate current reflection of what the card prices should be. So you could be bidding thinking the 75% of the 30-day average is fair, but if there's an injury, that 75% of the 30-day average that you bid that day could be actually the high price for that card. And then what happens if you win that auction? Then you're kind of in the shill bidding controversy that you might, you don't want to deal with because hobbyists will get upset, and just like I said, for all the reasons that, I've mentioned off the top. So I think there's a lot of other questions to ask. If I'm trying to think of a solution in terms of, how do I get fair market value? Essentially, I think that's the core of the question for me. Like, you want to leverage as much as you can when you put things on auction. I know we're going to talk about this later on in the episode, but I think the core question is, how do you get fair market value? And for me, even when I try to sell my cards that are maybe a little bit middle to higher in value, I usually go with a consignor that's well established and well trusted. That might be an easier way because you know that you'll get a certain level of eyeballs on the auction. I think the more eyeballs you get, the more interest you get on the auctions is probably the best way to go. So that's kind of in a nutshell, my initial thoughts on this question. I'm curious to see what kind of questions you had and what kind of conclusions you came to.
Yeah, first of all, I like your approach of asking more questions and just kind of opening up the dialogue here and to kind of dig into your two different areas. I mean, the algorithm, you made a good point. How does it actually work? We don't know, right? So it's almost like you would think that they would want the algorithm to work where they don't want this to happen. And so thus they would try to find account. So let's pick this apart, right? So to bid on your own card, you're not going to do it from your own eBay account that you've listed it as a seller. Right. I would think you would go create a second, third, fourth, whatever account using different email addresses. And then you would use a different device or some kind of a incognito window, clear the cache, whatever, to then log into that account and then bid on that card. Right. So if the algorithm truly is working well, I would hope that the algorithm is somehow accounting for those types of fake accounts and not necessarily boosting a card based on just the number of bids, right? I would hope that I would hope that eBay would have an algorithm where they would dig into whose accounts are bidding on that card, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So then the other thing you said, you mentioned a consignor kind of at the end, and I want to go back later to what you said about what actually is the 75% of the 30-day average, and because I think that's a good point too. But you mentioned a consignor, so now let's talk about that, because it's easier to bid on your own cards through a consignor, because in theory you could, like with PSA, I mean, let's be honest, like we could all go bid on our own cards that are in the PSA vault that we list. Because it's PSA's account. So how is anyone going to know that that's our card? I mean, at some point, maybe they could see that we're the bidder, but how is anyone going to know that that's our card, right? We might just be bidding on a card because we like the card. So I don't know that there's any way to know that, but what I do hope, I'll go back to what I said earlier, I would hope that PSA and eBay are working together in their integration to come up with a way to decrease the probability that someone could be logged into their own eBay account that's associated with their PSA vault account in some way. I don't know how they would know that right now, but they are partnering together. So I would think that they would figure out a way to make that happen, to where, for the sake of discussion, no off-season sports cards eBay account couldn't go bid on something in Paul Hickey's vault, right? That Paul Hickey listed, just for the sake of discussion. So But like with every other consigner, how would you know? Like if I go bid on a Probstein card or a DC Sports 87 card or, Hoodies Auctions or any of the other auction houses out there that list a lot of cards, quick consign, how would you know that I'm bidding on my own card? So I think it's easier to shill bid, if you will, through a consigner. And I know that this is not a new topic in the hobby, but I do think over the last 4 years, we've had a lot of new people come into the hobby that may not know about this, may not think this way.
Right.
So, okay, now back to, I guess, the middle point that you made. Mm-hmm. I mean, I agree with you. I think, like, who's to say that something doesn't happen, positive or negative, for that player or for that card, like, in the final hours of when that auction ends, that doesn't, I mean, that happens all the time, whether there's, shill bids or illegitimate bids or not. I mean, that happens all the time that affect cards' value. I think my final thought where I land on this is, I mean, there's obviously a lot that happens that doesn't get talked about. I think, and I like that we're talking about it. So I appreciate you.
Right.
This isn't a topic that I would just necessarily come up with off the top of my head. I like it because it came from the trenches. It came from the people that are making these moves, and they want to know, like, what's the deal with this? So I think we should talk about it. I think that ultimately I want everybody to know that, like, whether there's shadiness or shenanigans happening in certain auctions that are listed, everything does end up selling for the fair market value, and then everything does either end up getting paid for or not paid for. So someone could come in and counterpoint me and be like, well, Paul, it's not fair market value if there are shill bids in there. And I would probably agree, just because there would definitely be, I'd say 9 times out of 10, that would be a correct statement. Yes. So, but I think that, I think overall things are going to sell for their fair market value. So I think my answer to this person would be, and has been, I wouldn't do it, right? I wouldn't advocate doing it, because I don't think that there's any positives in it for you. I think there's only negatives. And then the thing that I think about, I advise people to bid on auctions. Like, that's how I advise people to buy their cards. And I know we'll talk a little bit about that later on in the episode. Yeah. But I typically advise people to buy their cards through auctions, because they're getting the fair market value. So they're increasing their chances of being able to flip it later for a profit.
Yeah.
Which, for those of you who don't know, that's what I'm all about. So I don't love new people coming in and trying to, when new people are coming in and they're trying to navigate and make money, if they go buy it now or best offer, a lot of times we don't know if they're putting themselves in a bad position with that, because a lot of times sellers will list something and buy it now way over what the fair market value is, which is another thing by itself. Like, you could argue that, is that an ethical concern? I don't think so, but is illegitimate bidding an ethical concern? I would say yes. So I would say, for those reasons, don't do it. And where I was going with this is, when I advise people to buy in auctions, I say only bid in that auction if there's multiple bids on that card. Don't bid when there's 0 bids, and don't bid when there's only 1 bid. And so I think if you reverse engineer that, you can't tell someone to bid on their own card. You can't tell someone that that's okay, and then also tell someone it's good advice to trust that those bids are legitimate when there's multiple bids on a card, if that makes sense. So I think that's my way of saying it's misleading everyone to only bid enough to get it up to 75% of its average comps in the last 30 days. Because even though your intention isn't to get it inflated past the fair market, the current market value, you are misleading people, saying that there is interest in that card when really there might not be interest in that card. And I think that if you're bidding, like when I'm bidding on a card, I'm thinking I am thinking, okay, like there's a lot of interest in this card, which means it's in theory it's going to have more interest down the road when I'm looking at listing it again.
Yeah.
So I don't want, I think that there's a lot of people who probably heard this question and just immediately were like heated and like, these guys better say there's no way. But I think it's real. It's real talk. We have to think these things through. Ultimately, my answer is that for all of those reasons, it's very misleading. And I mean, I'd love to know if there's other people out there that know more than I do about how the algorithm works or how consigners sort of work with eBay or don't work with eBay to try to make sure that the bids are legitimate. I'd like to learn more about that too.
Yeah, no, I mean, kind of to your point, just even talking about it, and I just share my initial thoughts, and then you coming back with the point that actually it's easier to shill bid in many ways if you consign your object. Like that didn't even cross my mind, but when you mentioned it, I'm like, oh yeah, that is 100% true. But yeah, at the end of the day, you want to sell your card at fair market value, and for me, just playing it out, to the extreme, if you were thinking of, essentially, it's like being a little greedy with what you hope to get from your card, and that's why most shill bidders will bid on their own cards because they want to maximize their value any way they can. But at the end of the day, you're kind of providing a disservice to yourself. Like the one thing I love about the hobby is that we have some of the best detectives within the hobby, right? Like it's so hard to hide any shady business because they're like, hey, did you see this eBay profile? It has 0, option wins. and then people will just highlight it in the forums that, there are plenty of within the hobby. And it's hard to get away with things like that. So it's just going to cause you a more of a headache, and then if you get caught, you could get banned from the platform. Like, there was a whole, when PWCC existed, that whole story of, accusations of them shill bidding their own cards. And obviously they turned into Fanatics Collect down the road. But before then, they had to create their own platform because they got booted out of eBay. So even big companies and bigger players do get caught as well. And you got to deal with the repercussions. It's just not worth the headache. That's essentially my point.
Yeah, your PwC example is spot on though, because that did happen. I mean, basically, it's like we're talking about an example of something that actually did happen back in like 2021. I mean, that's exactly what happened. Now, PwCC at the time, I think, played it off as like, oh well, they're just scared. eBay's just scared because we created our own marketplace, and they're kicking us off that way and all that stuff. But you could argue ComC has their own marketplace. eBay didn't kick ComC off there. I mean, all these other they're not the only ones. So, I mean, I guess I think like there is the honor system a lot of times in the hobby, but there's also dark things that happen. So I think there's more light than dark, more positive than negative. But I think that it's a good discussion. So I'd love it if we end up turning this into some kind of a roundtable discussion with some other folks. But for now, good work, Clark. Appreciate that. Okay, well, I want to kind of hand it over to you here to talk a little bit about, I think probably your favorite time of year right now, right? I mean, baseball,
love it.
Opening day is here.
Yes.
It's opening week, opening month, and I wanted to talk about some guys that might be good buys, or not good buys, but like I kind of wanted to talk about James Wood first. I was just kind of scrolling through my Instagram feed, and I saw a post about James Wood, his card market doubling, and in particular his 2022 Bowman Chrome First Prospect Auto in PSA 10 had sold in the buying season, December 4th, 2024. So what a great time to buy all sports cards typically.
Yeah.
And then it recently sold at mid-February this year. So just a couple months later for 460. So it went up from 214 to 460. And I like content like this. So I'll shout out We the Hobby and We the Hobby Cards for being the accounts that posted it. I like content like this because I think this is an achievable card. I don't know what the pop count is in the PSA 10, but they print obviously a lot of these first prospect autos that you can still get graded and things like that. So to me, it struck me as like, okay, what a great play. I mean, buying it during buying season when it's down and then selling it as the hype for baseball season kind of rises again. But then I thought, okay, I want to ask Clark about this because James Wood is a guy who, in my mind, has already had a couple selling markers. You know, he got traded in the Juan Soto deal to the Nationals, which was a selling marker for his cards. They went up a little bit. And then he has been called up. He's already made his major league debut, which is typically another selling marker. So I wanted to ask you about James Wood in terms of like a buy, sell, or hold, because I don't know that like his entire card market has doubled as like the headline says, but certainly this card did sell for more than twice of what it sold for a couple months earlier. So I think it begs the question, like, where does James Wood sit in your mind as a still very young prospect, young talent? And do you see him as a buy to where he will perform at a level where his card market truly does rise?
Yeah, no, great question. And I love talking about prospecting in baseball, especially. We've talked about James Wood on our Cards to the Moon podcast several times because he's a big boy and he can hit he can hit the ball really hard. And usually when he does, and when any player does, that's going to get some, it's going to be in the highlight reels. And then that brings more attention to the player. And, everyone still likes the long ball in baseball and in baseball card collecting. So that's why James Wood was really, when he was coming up the first time, was one of those guys that people were excited about. And I think initially when the 2022 Bowman Chrome set came out, I feel like it was probably even a little bit inflated because James Wood was one of those top prospects, right? So I'm pretty sure I would have said I'm not buying at the prices they're at during the day of the release or during the initial release period. But then there was this kind of like, slow period. There's always an adjustment period with these young guys, but he still showed a lot of potential in the minors. And then when he was called up, and just like you said, with the trade, there was some more attention to James Wood, and then people start talking about his potential again. And with prospecting, I feel like the driver of value for all of these young players is potential, right? And if they haven't really shown what kind of tools they have, then people's imaginations go wild. They're like, okay, the potential could be, here's the ceiling for this player. So again, to your point with what you just said, he does have some major league experience now. So he does have a bit of a track record. And I think that's kind of, you can't ignore that, and you can extrapolate it is a very small sample size, but I feel like there's, right now, at least with this kind of slight bump in value recently, I don't know how much more it'll continue to go up. I think your opportunity might have passed this past December, during the off season. Typically for most baseball players, you're looking in the off season. That's when you can probably get the best value. And I think with James Wood, his off season values were so low, and he still had that top prospect pedigree. It's worth a flyer at that point. You can't. I wouldn't give up on James Wood at this point. So I might have, even if I saw his PSA 10 Chrome Prospect Auto at $200, I'm like, yeah, why not? Take a flyer on it. And then there's hype going into the season. Washington Nationals are rebuilding. He's going to be a big part of that team. You could talk yourself into seeing a doubling of the price, and which it did. And so now, where we are with the $400 mark, I think it's a little too late. You're going to have to hope that he actually hits 30, 40 home runs at this point, and it's not easy to do. Obviously, as a major league player that young, but who knows? But you're taking a risk.
I think that's great advice. I think that happens a lot throughout baseball and also the other major sports where the player has to really, really do something special at a certain point for their cards to go up.
Yeah.
And playing the timing game of buying during the off season or during the low points in the year, and then simply selling when there's more interest or people start to get hype or talk themselves into possibilities is always a smart move. So for those of you out there, I mean, I would just say it may not be James Wood, but just take this pattern that we're talking about and then try to apply it next year, next December, to a similar type of prospect at that time. Just a couple things on James Wood. His 2022 Bowman Chrome first prospect auto refractor out of $499 in PSA 10 is the last sale was $700. And the average in the last 30 days is 776. So it has come down a little bit throughout March as we've led up to opening day. One card I wanted to ask you about, because I think you had mentioned this, not the James Wood version, but that this card for players is one that you look for, and that's his 2025 Topps Flagship Real One Auto Raw. So this would be, for those of you not familiar with baseball cards, this is now his rookie card in 2025 Topps. And it's the Real One Auto Raw. It's last sale $208, right between $200 and $250 basically in the last 30 days. And that's a lot different than his 2022 Bowman, which is definitely the more desirable card because of it's his first card. But this one, he's in his Nationals uniform. We just talked about James Wood and his Bowman Chrome first prospect auto PSA 10 would be one that you would fade. I'll just ask you before we move on to the other players we're going to talk about. Do you feel differently about something like his Real Ones auto, or is that too new of a release? Do we need to wait for the hype on that release to come down a little bit too? What do you think there?
Yeah, this is a personal rule for me. I love Real One autos, and because it's on card. Topps Heritage has it's a strong brand in my opinion for baseball cards. And I love Real One autos. I love Topps Heritage, but if it's $200, if it was $100, I'd take a flyer. It really is price dependent, I think, because I would fade the Bowman Chrome for all the reasons I just mentioned, but the Heritage is usually always much cheaper. And I thought before you said the $200 mark, I thought it would have been even lower, especially being raw. So I was surprised by that number. So I would, if it was like $100, maybe I'd take a flyer. I would consider it more so if it was more of an established superstar player like Bobby Witt Jr. Like, I don't want to pay the thousands of dollars for his first Bowman Chrome auto right now, but there might be a play with his Real One autos because they are cheaper, and I have just more confidence in Bobby Witt being one of those top 3 guys in the league, right? So I kind of put him in a different category altogether, different tier altogether. And with prospecting like James Wood and players like him, I would rather invest that money into something else.
There we go. Fade James Wood, everybody. And not that James Wood isn't going to have a great season or great career. It's just, it's extremely risky. So I like it. All right, Clark, there were 2 guys that you wanted me to add basically to the show notes here. I'll let you do the honors here.
Sure.
Who are we talking about next?
So we talked about this a couple of weeks ago on our pod, and I'm curious to see if you what you think of the points that I'm going to bring up in terms of the considerations you should take if you should buy or sell their players. And the 2 players we talked about were Roman Anthony, the Boston Red Sox top prospect, and Walker Jenkins, who's in the Minnesota Twins organization. And they're both very young guys. I think Walker Jenkins is just 20 years old. He's in Double-A. And Roman Anthony, he'll probably get called up to the majors this year. So I was mentioning with James Wood, he has a track record now because he's been in the major leagues for the past season and a half, 2 seasons. But these guys are still prospects and they haven't played an MLB game yet. So like I said before as well, the potential is what drives value. And Roman Anthony has been getting a lot of buzz lately because he had a great spring training this past couple weeks. And for me, when Hyung and I did a pick one segment, we had to pick which one we would rather invest in. I picked Roman Anthony, although his cards have also gone up almost similar trend as James Wood. I think it's at $400, $500 now for his Bowman Chrome first auto, BGS 95, 10 auto. and it's doubled probably since the offseason, December. So $200. So it's kind of the same, but the main difference is he hasn't played an MLB game, and there's still this hype growing of him, like what he could do in the majors. And I think that drives value. And the reality is he'll probably disappoint at first because, major league pitching is very different than minor league pitching. But the hype is still there. The question is how much hype is left going into the season. And I said, I'm willing to take the risk because, knowing that I could lose, but with Roman Anthony at $400, other things that I take into consideration, I don't know if this matters to you, but he plays for the Boston Red Sox, a historic key organization for Major League Baseball. So there's a lot more fans in Boston, a lot more, eyes on him as a player. So that could also drive up the value if he does well. And, he's a big guy. He could hit homers. And I think that's some extra factors that kind of maybe pushed me over to the decision of why not? Let's take a risk. Versus Walker Jenkins, Minnesota, not as big as Boston in terms of fan base and just being a historic city for baseball. And he's still really young too. So that actually might play a factor for him. He's 20, but at the same time, he might not be called to the bigs until next year. So there might be an opportunity for his cards to dip a little, or at the very least stay sideways. And there was an initial bump with Walker Jenkins because he was and is still considered one of the top prospects in baseball. And so he has that pedigree. So it won't dip a lot because he's still in the top 5 and people are still waiting for him to play, but it might be a couple of years. So that's what I mean. The price action might just be sideways for a while, but that might be a good time to invest in him. Hyung likes Walker Jenkins. He's more of a baseball guy, like a legit baseball guy. He's like, he has all the tools, very confident in his ability and skills. Me, I'm like, I look more on the hobby side. He plays for Minnesota. Do people want to collect his cards? Those considerations are bigger to me. But yeah, that's kind of why I would choose Roman Anthony over Walker Jenkins. But I think the higher ceiling right now is probably with Walker Jenkins because he's in the top 5. And one more thing I'll add before I turn it to you. I love collecting guys like Roman Anthony when he was in the top 10 to 20 prospect range. Because the top 1 to 10 is usually the prices are inflated to a certain degree. And from 10 to 20, there's a lot more risk, obviously. But you can see that top 10, 20 is like, who could possibly make that jump to the top 10 if everything breaks right, if they have a good spring training? Roman Anthony was that guy this year. He went from 10, 20 to the 1 to 10. I'm like, I should have bought him when he was a top 10 to 20 prospect. Now it's like top 1 to 10. I'm still in, but I'm taking a much bigger risk now with the investment than I would have maybe last year when he was a top 10 to 20 coming up in the Boston Red Sox organization. So those are just some top thoughts in my head. Curious to see what you think.
Yeah, that's well said. I mean, Roman Anthony's 2 and Walker Jenkins is 3 according to the MLB Top 100 right now. And you said it well in that, we at nooffseason.com, we recommend people look at baseball prospects through the lens of doing exactly what you said, which is look for guys that are big hitters, either outfielders, sometimes shortstops, sometimes other infield positions. And, catchers are very, very rare. We've seen some catchers, obviously, in the past, the recent past, be at the top of the list. But for the most part, these two guys, slugging outfielders, right? And
Yes.
but buy them exactly what you said at the end. Like, buy them when there's this pocket after their first Bowman Chrome autos have been out on the market for, say, 6 months, and people start to forget about them a little bit because they're out of the news cycle.
Yeah.
And they're not in the top 20 prospects on any of the major websites that publish top prospect information, because the baseball guys like Hyung are going to be the great resources to listen to when they're not in the top 10 or 20 prospects, to try and figure out who has the best chance to get to be a top 5 prospect.
Right.
I have personally been, I would say burned is like a strong term, but I have not crystallized the profits that I thought I was going to on guys like Jackson Holiday and Jackson Churio, but I have done much better on other guys that I've either gotten good advice and anticipated that they're going to be a top prospect and bought them ahead of time, like you're talking about. Or I think the best advice that I can give everybody to make money on these baseball prospects is go raw to grade. Because if you go where I've really lost or broken even is when I've gone PSA 10 of a top 10 prospect already, because they have so much baked into their pricing. And now, to your point, they get called up. Maybe there's a small bump in pricing, but it's actually kind of washed out by the eBay fees. So you're kind of like, you're not like really getting what you thought you were going to get. And unless they really go nuts like Ellie De La Cruz did, and that doesn't happen very often. I mean, we've seen Spencer Torkelson, we've seen Jared Kalenic, we've seen Jackson Holiday. I mean, even Jackson Churio wasn't horrible, but he didn't light the world on fire. And I mean, everyone's pricing is going to go down after the call up.
Yeah.
And because to your point, they're not going to hit major league pitching the way that they hit minor league pitching. So we've learned that like the actual selling marker has moved up a little bit for these guys. And I fear that Roman Anthony is a sell right now. Right. But in a pick one, he would be my pick if I had to pick one between him and Walker Jenkins, and I had to, because I believe that I would get my money back quicker with Roman Anthony for all the reasons that you talked about. Right. And because I like what you said about the Red Sox. I totally agree with you there. Like the Twins versus Red Sox, like it's not even close on that in terms of just your fan base size and your interest in people who are going to be buying his cards. If I were patient, maybe there still is a good opportunity to buy Walker Jenkins. Maybe Walker Jenkins is the James Wood of next year, like we just talked about. Like if he plays well enough to not suffer through some prospect fatigue, but he's not lighting the world on fire, but he's still up there, then maybe there's the Walker Jenkins graded play in December, and then you flip him in February of 2026, like we just talked about with James Wood. Now, but I think for both of those guys are great raw to grade right now, because our formula rankings at nooffseason.com, Roman Anthony's 2023 first Bowman auto, which is the one you're going to want. You have basically you're going to get a 20% ROI on a raw to grade play in bulk on that. It's not cheap to buy that card raw. You're going to have to pay close to between $250 and $300 to get that raw. So you're maybe not going to be able to buy many of them, but there is a 20% ROI. And then on Walker, it's pretty similar actually. So props to you and Hyung for the really close pick one on that. I mean, Walker, you make 14% on the exact same card. So my advice to everybody out there would be, look at those two guys from a raw to grade standpoint. Because even if you don't get your card back from PSA for Roman by the time he maybe hits the bigs, you still, if it gems, you'll still make money on that.
Right.
And if it doesn't gem, you're probably not going to be out too much.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, baseball's super fun for me in terms of prospecting. I know everybody likes it, but again, I would say like, be careful. I mean, Clark and I share a brain on this. I would say be careful. Like, don't think that you're going to like make a ton of money either on like penny stock prospecting or even on going all the way to the top of the list. It really has to be like this. It really has to be timing the market. And I think and or raw to grade, right? So
agree.
But I like those two guys. I hope everybody does well on their cards. I hope they do well as players. But realistically, maybe one out of the two of them is going to do well, and the other one's going to be a flop, just based on the odds of what we see happen there. So, cool, man. So we alluded to this whole discussion earlier on during the first topic, but just wanted to hit a little bit on eBay versus Fanatics Collect, and kind of this will overlap / kind of go into a little bit of the auction versus buy it now discussion that I wanted to have with you, because I think that's really relevant at all times. But I'm going through the motions of trying to buy Arch Manning cards. And, for those of you who don't know, he's one of the 5 players that I'm kind of dialed in on for 2025. I believe that when August rolls around, he's going to be Texas's starting quarterback. It doesn't get much bigger than that from a college football standpoint. You got like a top 5 program. You got like the top last name in all of football history, basically, playing quarterback, the number 1 position. He has investable cards out. He's had investable cards out since 2023. I believe his most investable card that's achievable for everybody out there is his 2023 Prism draft picks Saturday Star signature. So that's kind of his first. That would be the equivalent of like his first prospect auto for Bowman, kind of a thing. And because he's Panini exclusive. So I was just kind of looking at this and I'm like, okay, this is interesting. So the same card sold for 2 drastically different prices, really within a week of each other. And the week doesn't really matter, right? Because it's the off season. There's no Arch Manning news. So there's nothing happened in between the sale of those 2 cards that would change the price this much. So you had an eBay sale of $2,500 for the PSA 10 of the card that I just mentioned. And then you had a Fanatics Collect sale with buyer's premium of $900 of the same card. So and I quadruple checked that one wasn't the silver and the other, you know what I mean? I'm like, no, neither one of these is the silver. They're both the base auto. And so my thought is, we've seen some data. I'm curious to your guys' experience at Cards to the Moon. We've seen some data on Fanatics Collect versus eBay because we've dug in a lot to try to figure this out. And we have seen some buying opportunities for particular cards on Fanatics Collect that go cheaper than they do on eBay. And the other thing could be that the one on eBay, I don't believe was an auction. I believe it was a buy it now. The one on Fanatics Collect was an auction, 24 bids, but 24 bids for $900 and selling on eBay for $2,500 and a buy it now. First question. Have you seen such a discrepancy in the past between Fanatics Collect and eBay let's just say from an auction standpoint?
Yeah. Not with those, like the end dates that close, and I was laughing when you were saying that you quadruple checked. When you sent me that link, I quadruple checked. I'm like, oh, Paul made a mistake somewhere. Like I bet you this was like a rare parallel version and you just thought it was the same. And I literally checked like 3 or 4 times. And then when I realized that this is the exact same card, that's incredible. And I think the main lesson that I get from this, which is what I do personally, is that you got to check more than one marketplace, like constantly. And to answer your question, for the most part, the cards that I put on my watch list, like recently, for example, the Vladimir Guerrero first Bowman Chrome Blue Refractor. I love color match cards. There's been a few that's been on auction for both Fanatics Collect and on eBay, and they've been both ending similar prices. So it's usually comparable, but every once in a while, like this is what you're hoping for, where you see like, wow, this is a great deal. And it doesn't happen often in my opinion, but there are cases where I might have seen it once or twice before, but it's one of those things you have to constantly check all the time. Yeah.
Here's the thing, like I think there's a play here for certain types of cards, right? So like this Arch Manning, even though Arch Manning is a name and he has a lot of cards and his cards sell frequently, he is a bit of a niche. I mean, not everybody in the hobby is out there, touting Arch Manning. So he is a bit of a niche. And so I think for this type of a card, we saw on January 12th. So 2 months before the Fanatics Collect auction that I referenced that ended on 24 bids at $900. 2 months before, on eBay, the same card sold for $2,300 on 37 bids. So the sale in between that was the one the same week that I mentioned that was the fixed price on eBay for $2,500. So the reason I bring that up is because while January is 2 months earlier than March, and then 2 months is a long time, I would still kind of argue it doesn't matter that much because it's Arch Manning, and really nothing happened with Arch Manning between January and March that should have changed it. So then I would say it is the marketplace potentially. Or just, maybe it's just something new in terms of timing the market, but because you have auctions with such a huge discrepancy, to your point, check every marketplace, because there can sometimes, maybe it's not arbitrage, because like this card is a low pop card. So you're not going to go like arbitrage this particular card,
Right.
but you might be able to find other cards where you can have kind of an arbitrage from one marketplace to the other, especially when it comes to auctions. And then I think that leads us into the next topic, which is like, could there be somewhat of an arbitrage where just even on one marketplace, you're winning in auctions and then listing in buy it now? Because, that same thing's happening, like not only with this particular card, but other cards as well, where you see, and one that I want to bring up real quick is Cooper Flag, his Bowman U Now card, number 1, just the base card. There's a bazillion of these created PSA 10 that are out there. And I've seen sales over the last week, during March Madness here. We go from Arch Madness to March Madness. During March Madness here, where this is a $65 card in PSA 10, flat out. Like it's going for an average of $65, no matter how you slice it. But you do actually see sales that are calculated in that average of up to $129 in a buy it now. So you have a situation where it's like, can you make $129 on a $65 card by listing it as a buy it now instead of an auction? Yes. And then there's another sale at $102. So it's just kind of crazy to me that if you are, I guess, patient or dumb enough, I don't know, like if you're patient or dumb to like list at 129 when it's a $65 card, but somebody got that for it.
Right.
I mean, what do you think of all this?
Yeah, I think it's card dependent, right? Like I can see a scenario where, because there's platforms like Market Movers and Card Ladder where it just aggregates all the data. So that helps with looking at different marketplaces in one spot, right? And I think there are a lot of collectors like us and investors like us that do that. We check prices from different marketplaces all on one platform. And so the data is being widely available to those that are looking for it. And so I think because of that, there is a play where I can see a situation if you win an auction of a card that doesn't pop up very often, or it's highly sought after, and you got a good deal on an auction, you could list it on another platform or even on the same platform for a buy it now, because the people that missed out on that auction might start to get FOMO a little bit. They're like, I don't know when this card's going to show up again, but you have the last comp. And then if you don't see any other cards with, that are available currently, you could list it for a bit higher and get a higher price for it, because there might be a potential buyer for that card. So that's what I mean by it being card dependent. It sometimes has to do with scarcity or rarity of that card. So I could see a play there. But yeah, generally looking, I think that's the order, right? Like I personally look for the best deals on auctions. And you kind of said it at the beginning. That's, I believe, you get fair market value for the most part in auctions. That being said, I bought my Mike Trout refractor, first Bowman Chrome, through the PSA Vault, on the eBay site as a buy it now, right? Because it's one of those things I had to double and triple check that it was a refractor. It was numbered to 500, and it was the price that it said it was, 5,000 for buy it now. And the reason why I knew it was a good deal, because I always monitor auctions on that card, and the last few have ended around 6,000, 55, 58, even a little higher than 60. 6,000. So I'm like, wow, buy it now for 5,000. I was willing to go bid on an auction for 6,000. I need to get this card. So I already did the research on this leading up to purchasing that Mike Trout card, right? So there are potential for buy it nows to find good deals. Sometimes for fun, this is what I'll do, and it doesn't work most of the time, but I'll filter by buy it now, newly listed, because you just don't know if people have listed it for the right fair market price. They might have undervalued it, and that's a good opportunity to pick up a card that someone's just apparently really wants to sell quickly. So I'll do that every once in a while, but for the most part, the general rule for me is like you probably get the best deals through auctions.
Yeah, that's a great strategy too. Is the buy it now, newly listed. That's a similar concept to the auction, but the auction I think is like, I hate to keep saying it's for newer people. It's for anybody I think who's very smart and astute or just kind of wants to mitigate risk a little bit. Whereas I think I love your buy it now, newly listed. I think that's more for like astute veterans who've been burned. If you've been burned a lot, you've adjusted your strategy to not be burned anymore, and then you know how to go after those buy it now, newly listed, which I love, because you're obviously checking comps too. Yes. You're not gonna because you're checking comps to know whether or not it's a deal. Yes. But I love that strategy. I like what you said. It's timing dependent. That's my answer too. And not only for the reason that you gave where it might be a lower pop card, like the Arch Manning one, like that's a lower pop card. Mm-hmm. I've made some Michael Jordan plays similar to what you're talking about with Mike Trout, where I've been able to go get a Michael Jordan card under comps at a card show or in auctions on eBay. Mm-hmm. Knowing that I'm going to do something like swap it over to a different grading company or something like that, or maybe I buy it raw and then I grade it. So something to change it just a little bit, but then sell it on the same platform for like much higher than what I want it for, because I did sort of quote unquote work hard to like win the auction. You know what I mean? Because I'm like, that's what I'm researching and all that stuff. But it's interesting, like even these Cooper Flag Bowman U Now PSA 10s, and I didn't pull the real pop count. I said there's like bazillions of them or whatever. Right. Even though I didn't pull the real pop count, like you can trust me that these things are easy to find. But even that one, which is not rare, is timing dependent because of what's happening right now. We're in the middle of the NCAA tournament. Cooper Flag is playing very well. Yep. And I think if you're out there listening and you're going, okay, well, I want to do what Paul said, where he was like, list it for 129. The reason why I said you might be dumb to do that is because Cooper Flag has a ridiculous amount of other cards out right now. And I think the only reason why that one went for 129 and the other one went for 102 is because he's like averaging a triple double or close to it in the NCAA tournament. And his Bowman Chrome first cards are out and they have already far superseded what this card is. So if you're listing this card in a buy it now, the Cooper Flag Bowman U Now PSA 10 number 1 or any of them, he's got like 4 of them. If you're listing it in a buy it now, the risk you're running is that nobody cares about it like tomorrow. And then it really is a $65 card right now, but tomorrow it could be like a $45. Pretty soon it's going to be a $35 card. If you list it on eBay at $129 to try to be greedy right now, even cards like that are timing dependent. I think you should be listing those in auctions. Get the 55 to 65 now, move out of it, because it's just not a desirable card. So I think like you could shoot yourself in the foot if you don't know where each individual card stands within the player's ecosystem of cards. The Mike Trout card that Clark talked about is like one of Mike Trout's best cards. The Cooper Flag card that I'm talking about is going to be worth almost nothing in like August. Yes. So like almost nothing, meaning like a PSA 10 will be going for like $20-$25, which is the grading fee.
Right.
So timing dependent, card dependent really is the punchline there. So auctions versus buy it now, it depends. But if you can get something in an auction, you've done your research, you know that it's a good deal, or you could get it in a buy it now if you know what you're doing. It's just sometimes you run the risk on a lower pop card if you buy it in a buy it now. That's probably, or even in a best offer accepted, that's where I've lost the most. Because even though maybe I was right about the player or the card being desirable, I didn't make any money because it was like so so rare, I guess, that I was the most recent comp like 6 months later. So there's no one's going to pay me for, or no one's going to bid it up unless that athlete does something.
That's a good point.
Ridiculously impressive, to drive up the value.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you brought up that point too, because I with auctions, at least you'll know you'll sell by the end of the auction for the most part. Yeah, and buy it now. Like if sometimes I get lazy, I'll post something on buy it now, and then you have to monitor those prices, because there are times when a player does do really well and the card values go up, and then you forget that you listed it for a certain price, and then one of those I've been burned a couple of times where like, oh, that card's sold, and then you realize, oh wait, the comps are much higher now. Right? It's like, oh, because he's when Aaron Judge hit 60 home runs, if you're not paying close attention to what's happening, and then seeing the trends go upward, if you put in a buy it now price a long time ago, you got to keep track of your inventory that way as well. So just a heads up.
Yeah, that's another good point. All right. Well, this has been awesome. I always love creating content with you, Clark. Everybody, I hope you got some value out of today's show. Clark, anything else you want to add?
No, we covered a lot. So yeah, I'm looking forward to next month.
All right. Sounds good, man. We'll talk soon. Thanks so much for being here with us on the Sports Card Strategy Show. If you enjoyed the content on today's show, there's plenty more waiting for you at nooffseason.com. Just go to nooffseason.com right now and get a free 30-day trial. You get our formula-based sports card rankings, sports card school, inventory tracker, the ability to grade with us, and the premium podcast where we answer an unlimited amount of your questions. Check it out right now at nooffseason.com. For everyone at nooffseason.com, I'm Paul Hickey. Thanks again for being here with us on the Sports Card Strategy Show. We'll see you again soon. Have a great day.